Hello and happy Monday. This is an afternoon edition of I Need Coffee. And today, a Twitter thread has motivated me to talk about a question that I've had recently. And I mentioned in my most recent video about preparing a Business Central development environment, my Learning BC AL Development from Scratch series, where I explained that I chose to use Docker Enterprise on Windows Server. And while I've read that Docker Desktop on Windows 10 should be fine, a thread this morning on Twitter has kind of brought that question up again as to whether Docker Desktop on Windows 10 is a suitable platform for commercial or production AL development. So let's talk about that. So before I move forward, just a reminder that I currently live stream my videos simultaneously on Periscope, YouTube, and Twitch all at the same time. So you can watch them live on all three of those platforms. However, I have noticed that the surprising majority of the views on the videos are occurring on Periscope, and I'm assuming that's because of the convenience of Periscope on Twitter. It shows up in the feed. It's super convenient to just click right there on the Twitter, the embedded video in the Twitter feed, and you can watch it there. However, just heads up that the Periscope video feed is low quality. It may look fine on a phone or a tablet, a mobile device, but if you try to watch it in a browser or enlarge that or go full screen, the video quality is pretty poor. It's like, I don't even think it's 720. It's like a 480p. It fades in and out in terms of compression. And also I've noticed the audio is very poor quality and the volume isn't quite right. So if you're looking to replay the video, I would definitely encourage you to do so on YouTube or Twitch. It should always be available for replay on YouTube at full 1080p resolution. And also Twitch has high quality streaming. However, my understanding is the Twitch video is only saved for 28 days. So if you're watching a recent video, Twitch is fine, but YouTube is the old standby and it should be there forever. And the quality should be very good on YouTube. So Periscope is fine if you're on a mobile device, very convenient. But if you want to actually read the screen or see what's going on in detail, I'd say YouTube is the better option. So just a heads up there. And with that housekeeping, the question is Docker Desktop on Windows 10 stable? And here I see a tweet from Luke. This was early this morning, my time. And how do you run Docker? How do you run your Docker stable on Windows 10? And I wasn't sure what his overall story was or what the syntax of this or the context of this question was. So I'm wondering, is Docker on Windows 10 inherently unstable? Or is it just the upgrades that cause issues? Because I've seen a few comments that trying to upgrade Docker Desktop on Windows 10 can be a mess. Waldo has mentioned that on Twitter, and a few others have agreed. And so I'm wondering, is it just upgrades, or is there something fundamental about Docker Desktop on Windows 10 where people are encountering issues? And then there are some secondary questions as, okay, well, what is the underlying cause? Is it really Docker Desktop on Windows 10 that's the issue? Or is it something about the nav container helper setup where, say, a Windows build is updated and the old containers stop working? It's really hard to know. There are quite a few moving pieces in there. So I just want to talk about that and try to understand what are people's experiences with Docker Desktop on Windows 10. And I'll show you a few examples. So here are a couple examples. So Natalie is saying that so far she's used Docker on Windows 10 without any issues so far, and she didn't have to do anything particularly special or elaborate. So then another person is saying he hasn't had any major issues, and that stable should be fine. Obviously, kind of take precautions. Don't do updates in the middle of some critical deployment or critical process. have some maintenance window where you can expect potential downtime in case you have a problem. So couple follow-on questions from this. It may work fine for some people, but couple questions. Have they only been recently using Docker Desktop on Windows 10? There may be some changes over the last year, 2 years, or 6 months where things have stabilized. Second, how much time have these people been spending using Docker Desktop? Have they upgraded Docker Desktop? Have they created new containers? Have they have new window builds come out and had to refresh? So it's hard to know, what stable means or what unstable means because we don't know what the cause of the issue is. And one moment, let me just check, make sure things are working. Okay, so sounds good. So is the issue really just Docker Desktop upgrade? So here, Waldo is reiterating, don't upgrade Docker Desktop. If it works fine, leave it. Don't, if it works, don't break it. And he's written a blog post on this, and Christoph is agreeing with that. Then there is another group of people who have gone with Docker Enterprise on Windows Server, and I'm one of those, but not necessarily for any of these stability reasons. So AJ is saying don't run Docker Desktop. He tried it, but it was unstable. And so the question is when? If that was 2 years ago, I can totally understand. A lot has changed with both Docker Desktop, Nav Container Helper, the BC images that are used with Nav Container Helper. Freddie has made a lot of improvements in that process, the build, the deployment, the version matching. So what was the cause? Was it really Docker Desktop, or was it the OS version compatibility hassles that used to exist that may be resolved now? And AJ has a blog post on, if you're interested in trying Docker Enterprise on Windows 10, can you do that? And apparently it's not supported, but you can do some workarounds. Well, do you want to really work around that and have these little bit of script hacks to get it to work on a Windows 10? Is that safe enough for your environment? If you're just, trying to play around and experiment, it probably is perfectly fine. Do you want to run your company on it? Do you want to develop ISV solutions on it? I probably wouldn't do that personally. And has Docker Desktop improved over the last year or two? And so Klaus is saying that he just got tired of fighting it. And I don't know when that was, but he got tired of dealing with Windows issues, Docker issues. So now he just sticks with Docker Server, and that seems to be safe. So it might have improved over the last year, but is it worth the hassle? If you have access to Windows Server, if Docker Enterprise on Server 2019 is stable, why fight it? And I'm in that camp. After you've burned 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, a couple days, weeks, tried to fight it over several months, at what point do you just throw in the towel and say, okay, I'm sick of fighting this. Windows 10, Docker Desktop, it's just not worth it. Let's go to Server 2019, Docker Enterprise. I haven't had any issues with Docker. I've made some mistakes with Nav Container Helper, totally my fault, version-specific issues, things that I did wrong. But Docker Enterprise seems to be fine for me on Server 2019. So this is my old school philosophy. And, when I started using Windows and building servers, there was the old Windows NT, right? So you had Windows NT for your server, you had Windows 3.1 or whatever the version was for your desktop. You didn't attempt to try to run Windows Server software on Windows 3.1 if you wanted reliability. And obviously a ton has changed in the Windows world. And last I recall, Windows Server and Windows 10 effectively used the same kernel, the same architecture, the same underlying code base, but I believe there are still some differences. The driver validation is different. What processes are allowed to run at what level, like the whole Ring 0 thing. I think that may be different in Windows Server versus Windows 10. Then there's the whole LTSC version. I think that is different in Windows Server versus Windows 10 and the desktop edition. So I think there are still some technical difference between the two. But for me, Windows 10 is for the desktop. I'll put it on my desktop. I'll put it on my laptop. I'll install lots of apps. I may have 50 different, 100 different apps on my desktop that I install and uninstall and try and play with. And over time, my desktop becomes a mess. And every few years, I have to wipe it and reinstall because something just stops working right. That's fine for my desktop. I don't want to have to deal with that instability or changing environment on my servers. So I use Windows Server for my servers. I keep them clean, have the minimal apps. I don't install a bunch of desktop apps on my server. If I can avoid installing Office on my servers, I don't. I try to keep things as clean as possible, have a very, very minimal software install footprint on my servers. So because of that, my servers are very reliable. I'll install my dev tools and whatever tools I need in order to do development, but nothing else. And so few apps or changes. So from my perspective, a Business Central Docker container, that is a server. Yes, it's Docker, and technically, you can dispose of your containers, get new images, rebuild at any time. But really, it's a full server infrastructure, a full server stack that is running in the background. And even though they're disposable and can be replaced, I'm looking for the stability that I would expect from a server. So personally, I go with Windows Server, Docker Enterprise for my Docker containers. I also prefer a Windows service. I want a native Windows service. So here I show Docker Engine running as a Windows service on Windows Server 2019. I didn't have to fight anything. I didn't have to do any scripts to work around any restrictions, and it just runs natively. So that's worked for me. Now, obviously, you need to have Windows Server in order to do this, so I understand that's a potential limitation, but I want the stability. Now, there are limitations of my approach. I have two setups. I have a physical server with Windows Server 2019 and Docker Enterprise. That is a physical box with Server 2019, Docker Enterprise installed on the hardware, that machine. And I built that machine to rule out all other variables because I had tons of problems when I first started and I didn't know what it was. Old hardware, old software, my mistakes. I found that if I had that bare metal hardware, bare metal install, I got Docker to work flawlessly with Windows Server 2019 and Docker Enterprise. So great, that was my baseline. It was not worth my time to try to figure out whether I could get it to work under some other messy scenario on my laptop. So with that, I then tried Hyper-V virtual machine using Server 2019 on my Hyper-V host. That has worked fine. I haven't had any issues so far with a Hyper-V VM running 2019 with Enterprise. So I now have two options. I have my bare metal server, and I now have two Hyper-V VMs that can run Docker, create BC images flawlessly. But my solution is not mobile. Mine involves servers in my office, two different physical machines. I have to have network connectivity to those machines over RDP or over the network. And if I'm remote, I need to have an internet connection and VPN to my office in order to make those work. So if you're looking to do AL development on a plane disconnected while you're traveling, or I guess not so much a plane anymore, but on the road, remote, whatever that may look like in these days, then I can totally understand wanting to do it on a laptop. And I haven't yet experimented with that. And personally, I haven't really needed that. I have not done purely offline mobile development in 10 years. Everything I've been able to do on my Hyper-V server with development on that machine in virtual machines using a network connection and VM. The only exception I've had is, I think twice, at conferences, the hotel Wi-Fi either blocked my VPN, my old VPN I was using at the time, or there were potential performance issues. So I just had a local copy of the tools that I needed for those demos for conference presentations. I didn't expect to do any serious development on my laptop disconnected. So at the moment, given my cell phone coverage, the amazing cell phone data speeds I'm getting, 50 plus megabit performance on my particular carrier in most urban areas, I've been able to work fine with a VPN or internet connection and have access to my servers. So I'm hoping that works for me. But if I have to, I'll figure out, maybe I'll buy a gaming laptop and have Server 2019 on there if I really, really needed remote development capability. So that's what I'm going for. It looks like Luke is looking for a remote or mobile solution and seeing if he could pull it off on Windows 10, but he's just kind of checking the waters to see if that's a reliable option. So I'm very curious, and I understand some people have probably had perfect experience with Windows 10. Docker Desktop has worked fine for them, but like anything, just because you've had a flawless experience with it, you know the thing, well, it doesn't work for these other people for who knows what reason. And I'm curious to know what those other reasons are. Is it a year ago you had problems, or are you still encountering these problems? Is it updating Docker Desktop that's causing the issues? Or is it a fundamental issue with a continuous stability problem with a given version of Docker Desktop on Windows 10? Or are you encountering issues when you try to use Nav Container Helper with Docker Desktop on Windows 10? Those are different things, and I'm trying to narrow down where are these problems coming from. If it's Docker Desktop is fine on Windows 10, but you're running into Nav Container Helper issues because you're different Windows builds, totally understand that. Or is it every time you try to update Docker Desktop on Windows 10, it breaks all your existing images and containers and you have to refresh? I can kind of see that as well. And maybe Docker Enterprise on Windows Server would have the same issue. I've just never updated Docker Enterprise, so I don't know. I could try that as an experiment, see what happened. So I'm interested in your feedback. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Endo, and there's a thread there going on with Luke and Waldo and many other people chiming in. Check out that Twitter thread and share your thoughts. My blog is blog.steveendo.com, and obviously you can watch these videos on YouTube or Twitch under my channel, Steve Endo, on both of those. So let me know what your experiences are with Docker development, either desktop or enterprise, and are you on Windows 10 or Server 2019, and how have things been going? Okay, talk to you later.
Good morning, sun.